Okay, this is Royal Hamel talking. I've been living in this community for so long now, it's hard to decide where to start. But I came to Maplehurst just out of school and stayed with my mother as a companion, my father having died several years before, or some years before. But I was born in 1904 at Stevens Point. My mother and father, Alice and Louis Hamel, and the name Hamel, grandfather, came from France, and that's how I got that. Now, they moved to Appleton about 2 years later, from Appleton to Clark. Now this Clark is located northwest of Owen, and after living there for 2 years, then we moved to Maplehurst. And at Maplehurst, I was then able, at that time, I was able to go into woods work with two brothers and a sister having bought wild land. I helped them in land clearing to have a garden, build log houses, and which was early in the 1920s. Then,
talk about it.
Now, in 1920, I started high school. I did not stay there so very long. I was too full of wanderlust, and I came to Withee to live with mother and to be in the area of my brothers. But not exactly Withee, it was Amber, which is now Clark, and I worked there in the log yards, loading logs, sawmill, sawing logs, and didn't go back to school anymore after a year and a half. Among the other jobs that I had that were really interesting, besides helping around at Amber, at home and with the brothers, as I mentioned, I made a trip to North Dakota, went through harvest and thrashing, having relation out there. It was no trouble getting a job. And then came back to stay with mother over winter, as had been the case. Turn that on. Now perhaps I might say right now, I got married in 1924 to an Elsie Bartman of Appleton, and she came here to live in the woods with and while I was there with mother. And not liking it too well, as she came from the city, but she did stay, and we had two children, two boys, Alan and Don, who live away from here. But at that time, the milk hauling became organized, and I had a milk truck in the early days of 1926 and hauled milk then for 13 and a half years. Lapping into that was the school bus. I had both school bus and milk route for a while, keeping me plenty busy. Now this condensery to which I hauled the milk was owned by an Oatman Condensed Milk Company of Dundee, Illinois. And they started in 1926, at the time that I started hauling milk to them. In those years there was no snow plowing, so the milk hauling involved horse transportation for the milk in the wintertime and Model T trucks in the summer. Until the county highway department took over the snow plowing of the roads, that was the way the milk had to be transported. Now, following my period of milk hauling, which was into the named condensery, then the high schools began, or wished to have transportation for the high school students from the rural areas to town. So I then, with an arrangement of the school board, got my first school bus and hauled kids to the Withee high school and grade school, and continued that for several years. I can mention a few incidents that happened during that time, but it did last for 37 years. I made the extracurricular trips regularly, basketball, the sports trips, basketball, and other extracurricular trips which involved ag class, senior class trips to Milwaukee, and put-ins. Many, many miles making school trips.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you, Royal, did you have a snowplow on your bus? Tell us about that.
Yes. Before the county did the snowplowing, which I mentioned some time ago, I had a snowplow put on my school bus, which was very unusual. In fact, many, many people thought that I wouldn't have it very long, that they would outlaw that. But it was the only possible way of getting the children into school through the winter. And of course there were an occasional school closing, but that didn't make any difference. With the snowplow I was able to continue. And the kids really enjoyed the whole trip with the snowplow.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that, the lack of telephones, how school closing affected you.
Living well out in the country, the bus route of course involved all rural children. And living out in the country, no telephones, and I would start on any given day to go to school, pick up my first few children, and get to the first telephone. Then I'd be told school is closed, take them back home. One of the comedies of the thing.
You could tell that once you couldn't get the kids, some of the kids home, so you took them home. How about telling us about that?
Well, there were 4 children living on dead-end roads which I could not make. The drifting with the school bus and not having the snowplow, there was nothing else to do but take them home. I couldn't let them off without any way of getting home. So when I arrived home and the wife took a good look, why, we just arranged to put the children up, and the next morning, a nice day, and took them back. And the parents thanked me for taking care of their kids. I just got a big laugh out of it. During the time that I was on the school bus, I also became janitor of the Withee school with the help of my wife and one of my boys, Don, and continued that for 15 years. And then had to retire from the school work. The bus job continued for 5 more years until I became 70 years old, which was then state law. And that caused my retirement.
But now I understand, Royal, that things have changed about bus drivers.
Of course, now the law has changed on the 70 limit, age limit for bus drivers. As long as they pass a physical, capable drivers, they may go on indefinite. I sure wish it would have happened to me. Now at this time I might bring into this story, in 1945, leaving the farm and moving into town was the last year of World War II. Now workers were needed at the Owen Cannery, Henry Wallum, manager of the cannery, and German prisoners were available from a prison camp on the south side of Marshfield, and I hauled them to Owen the full summer for the pea pack and the bean pack. Became well acquainted with several German prisoners who could talk some English, most of them none at all, and made several friends, but at no time was I able to communicate with them after that. At this time, I think I better tell you that my wife Elsie died in December 4th, 1975, at 70 years old. I sure missed her a lot, and still do, and am still living alone in the home that we had, which we bought in 1945 when we retired from the farm, and have lived there ever since, and I still live there.